Hi, and welcome to our guest speaker, Zach Louden, for the Careers in the Visual Arts and the Portfolio class at Foothill College in spring 2020. And here's the page. If you go to our website, each of the websites have a page about Zach and some of the links that he shared with me. And when this is recorded, the recording link will go in place of the Zoom link. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Zach, for being here. We're super excited about what you do and what and you're sharing. So I'm going to turn it right over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kate. So my name's Zach. I'm currently a product designer working for a company called HashiCorp. We make software tools for infrastructure engineers mostly. So if you're familiar with like Google Cloud Platform, Amazon Web Services, things like that, basically setting up the foundational things that software and websites use. I was just to give you a little bit of background, I was a fine art major in college. I mostly did sculpture, but I also minored in graphic design and web design, which I'm really glad that I did in hindsight. I still love art. I still love making things, but I really enjoy the path that I've taken, branching out into designing software applications. It's a totally different set of challenges, and I've learned a ton along the way, but it's still something that satisfies, my need to create things and solve problems. When I was in college, I started building websites on the side, just like freelance work. In hindsight, really terrible work. I was not a great graphic designer, but it's something that I kept at, and kept picking up, side projects and designing logos, designing websites, things like that. And then I moved out to California after school. I moved in with my sister. This was 12 years ago or so. Who Kate knows, who's just actually has a full-time position now at Cabrillo as a photo teacher.
I didn't hear yet. That's so exciting.
Oh,
Oh,
I don't know.
wow.
I don't.
You might not
I
be
don't know
out.
I don't know if I'm supposed to tell you that, but I don't know. So anyhow, she's
Well, anyway, it's a secret. A few people here probably
yeah.
took classes. Leslie Louden is one of our dearest and sweetest and most amazing professors at Foothill, and she's been, and she is Zach's sister. So we have a family connection in the Foothill family, at least.
Yeah, so don't tell her I told you. I'll let her tell you. So anyhow, along the same lines, my sister, um, since I was a kid, always was into photography, and she's been doing that her whole life. And after she got her master's, she really worked her butt off for years, driving between schools, working as an adjunct professor, and she's one of the hardest working people I know. And so it's one of those things that if you're passionate about it, and it's kind of like the same thing I do, if you're passionate about it and you keep following it and working hard, you can find a path to do it. And there are always many times where you think, I don't know if I'll ever be good enough, or I'm sure everyone else is so much more capable than I am, or everyone's so much smarter than I am. And then you get out in the real world and start working at different companies, and you realize, you're as capable, if not more capable than anyone else, even at the top companies. But self-doubt is a very normal thing. But it's possible to find a rewarding career, and something that you enjoy. And so on that note, I'll show you some of the work that I do. I do a lot of different things, and it kind of runs the gamut, but I'll try to start out on just showing you some projects that I've worked on in the past. and then kind of like what a day in the life looks like and what I do. So let me.
Thank you so much, Zach. Yeah, it's interesting because within this class, there's a mix of designers and people who definitely want to go into your area, particularly website people, photographers, fine artists, and as I really like that idea that we both of us studied fine art in our college days, and what the career we made out grows from that basis that we started with, and I think that's exciting. So, and I assume you're familiar with Zoom and you know how to share your screen, or there's a green button in the
Yes.
bottom middle. Cool, cool.
Yeah, and along those lines, I've learned a lot, and being a fine art major and that process that I still use to this day. The critique process is huge. It's something that's important and useful every day, learning how to accept um, criticism of your work, constructive feedback. And one of the things over the years that I've worked on is separating myself and my own personal identity and feelings about myself from my work, which has taken some time to do. As many of you may have experienced, when somebody critiques your work or says anything that's other than "yay, great job," it's kind of like, oh, that hurts. But after a while, it's super important to be able to learn how to accept that criticism and work on making something better. So here is a project that I've worked on in the past, StreamSets Cloud. It's basically an application that data engineers use to move data from one source to another, from a database to a data warehouse or whatever. I'll try not to get too super technical, but this is basically the end product, and then I'll show you what the process looks like. So users come in, they have a dashboard of important things that they want to see, and a part of the job is figuring out what it is that's useful to them and what they want to see, what's helpful. So a part of that process is interviewing the users, getting as much feedback as we possibly can and as much insight as we can into their lives, to see how they use our applications, how they do their jobs, and figuring out what the pain points are, and finding a way to make that experience better. And a huge part of that is, well, I'll start going through some more of the process here. Let's see. So I think it would be good to show, let's see, what the
I really
process
love
is.
how you showed the questioning process there. A couple people's, because some people here are in the portfolio class where they're building their portfolio, and asking that question: do they show the back work, and when do they show the back work? And I thought that was so. Then they have a link to your website so they can explore that model on their own. But I think that's a really good thing to point out.
So when it comes to your portfolio, the thing you have to think about, and this is a part of being, product designer, or I should also say I was, my title was UX designer, user experience designer, and that's kind of like evolved over the years. So, product designer is like the current title that's used a lot, and that's really like what people call like a full stack designer. You have visual skills, you can interview users, you know how to work with engineers, and all that stuff. Basically, everything that goes into designing a software product. And when somebody comes to your portfolio, the thing that you want to do is, put yourself in their shoes. Somebody who's looking at, 100 portfolios in a day, and I've done a lot of hiring in the past and screening candidates and reviewing portfolios. And you have to go through dozens and dozens and dozens. And something like Greenhouse, which is like an internal recruiting software application, it doesn't make it easy to view portfolios. So you want to make an impact as quickly and easily as you can. So I try to keep it concise. Like my old portfolios would, I would explain a lot, and like, you'd go to like a food blog looking for a recipe, and they give you like 10 pages of backstory, and then you finally get to the recipe. Like, and that's kind of what my portfolio used to look like until people were like, we're not, we're not reading all of this. We don't have time to read all of this. So just like give me, the meat of it as quickly as you can. Because people just don't have a ton of patience and they don't have a ton of time to review this kind of stuff. So you want to get to the point as quickly as possible. And it's not something I'm great at with words, but if I have enough time to pare it down visually, then I can do that. So at this point, and I'll go into a little more detail around, the design system, which is kind of like the foundation for building software applications. Like in my portfolio, you want to make sure it looks good. And there's some websites that have really good examples. I can't think of off the top of my head. I can send you a link afterward. But basically, you look at portfolios for people who have done a really good job of it. There are like some famous ones, like a guy named Simon Pan, who has like a super famous and well-known portfolio where you outline, the problems you're trying to solve, and how you went about solving that, what the end result was, and what impact that had. And you basically just want to put that together as quickly and as concise as possible. And if you can show that visually, that makes a huge difference. And a lot of times when people go through your portfolio, they'll just like look at the visual stuff, and if they get drawn in more, then they'll read some of the other stuff. But if it's a ton of text, odds are, it's going to get skipped over. You can see here, I just kind of explained different screens and what they're for. And if you want to go through in more detail later, you can. But that's kind of what makes a good portfolio. And I'll show you. Let's see. So this guy's Simon Pan. So here's like one of his projects. So he worked on a project at Uber, and he has a really good way of, walking through his designs and then showing the problems that he's looking to solve. What his role was, what the research process was. He explains that through pictures and visuals, and you can see the point there. So learning how to lay out a portfolio like this is huge. And if you can make a really good portfolio, odds are you probably have a good process to design software applications or design websites in general. And people will always ask you about the process. So speaking of process, I'll go through briefly what a day looks like, because very little of my day these days is actually dedicated to working in something like Sketch or Figma. There are periods where I'll do nothing but that for days straight, but most of the time it's really trying to build a consensus around what makes sense to build and ship to users. It's an easy thing to get wrong, and if you get it wrong, it's really hard to undo it. So you want to make sure you're doing the right thing off the bat. So day to day, my main point of contact at the company, aside from other designers at the company, we have our own team. There's a marketing design team, and then there's a product design team. And we're kind of separate. Like the marketing design team works on the website. They work on all of the marketing collateral. They work on the logos, things like that. And then we work on the product and the software applications and what that looks like. So when a project starts, typically a product manager that I work with will write what's known as a PRD, or product requirements document, and in there they will outline what the problem is that we're trying to solve. So they'll put together all this information, It's basically a brief, and I'm not going to bore you with the specific details here, but we read through all of it. People comment on it, and then I take all this information and I start working and talking with the product manager to get an understanding of what the problem is. And from there, after enough discussions, then we'll go into, let me see, this is kind of the controls. Okay. So then I'll start putting together, and you spend a lot of time like building background information and just understanding what the problem is. And then the next step typically is to start putting together a user flow. So in this case, we use Whimsical. Other applications I've used in the past are what used to be called Real-Time Board, and I think they rebranded as Miro now. And our company's fully remote, and I expect more companies to go fully remote. And it's definitely a different set of skills than being on site all the time. And it's important to have a good process, a good routine, good structure for that. So in this case, this is the collaborative software we use. The product manager can come in here, asynchronously. Like we don't have to be in the same room at the same time. We don't have to be in the same meeting. We communicate through Slack. We communicate through email occasionally for certain things. But then I'll start putting a user flow together. And if it's not right, then he'll like leave some notes or he'll correct it until we have an understanding of what the flow should look like and what the user needs are. From that point, I will start putting together wireframes in either Figma or Sketch. Sketch is used a lot at smaller companies, and it has some gaps in some of its collaboration tools and like version control and things like that, and working with bigger teams. So what a lot of, especially larger teams, are moving to is Figma, which has a lot of built-in like commenting features, version history. It's much more scalable for a large organization. It's kind of like an all-in-one tool. They also have a free version, so you can try it out if you want. But that's mostly what we use now. I mean, it's pretty much what everyone uses. I used Illustrator for, like 15 years to, put together UIs and do mockups and things like that. But I've personally gotten away from, I've tried to get away from Adobe products. Photoshop is definitely the best as far as photo editing goes. So that's the only reason I get an Adobe license anymore, is if I need Photoshop for something. But aside from that, it's pretty much all Sketch and Figma. So there is, there's a nonprofit that I started doing some volunteer work for, and their mission is to help inmates, prison inmates and jail inmates communicate with family members for free or low cost, because the companies that are doing it now charge, a crazy amount of money, and they feel like people who don't have the funds or resources should still be able to communicate with, people on the outside. And so I just started helping them. So I came in and started looking at what they have in their, and they started using Figma, their Figma files. So I'll show you what they had in their design system. Let's see. So these are the files, coming into it that were existing. They started working on the website. Stuff's kind of like all over the place. Like they didn't really have a whole lot of structure to it. And things aren't, super well organized. So that's something that I started helping out with. They started putting together a design system, which if you have the luxury to do that, it's like the first thing to do. Get that done to make sure it's cohesive. And so was what they had. when I started working on the project with them. Um, there wasn't a whole lot. They're just like 19-year-old college students, and they don't have a ton of experience yet. And so what I started doing is organizing their Figma file first. So we have like a cover. You typically put a cover on it so you can easily see what the project is. Here you can see it's the design system. This is just a placeholder name, the Amelia 1.0. You can name it whatever you want, something more fun or interesting. Um, and then here you can see what these are at a glance. And so I started just breaking things down into their most basic levels, which is what something that you do quite a bit, and organizing the structure of their design system. So you need, and I'll show you. And there's nothing in here. Well, there's colors right now. And there isn't a whole lot else in there. And one of the things I started doing is adding colors to these shareable and reusable palettes here. And you'll see the other stuff is blank right now, but I just started organizing it for them. And then a completed design system looks more like this. So you'll typically start out with, say, like a color palette that works, pretty well. A lot of times I will get, inspiration from companies that have invested millions of dollars and countless, person hours researching what colors work well in a UI. And so I tend to, start from there and kind of build off of what they've done. I don't, try to reinvent the wheel. It's just not really super practical to try to make it more of an artistic expression of yourself. It really comes down to problem solving. What solves a problem? What's practical? What can you get done by a certain timeline? And so that's where I'll start, and that saves a lot of time. And when I was in college, I took like 2 years of color theory. And I mean, as I'm sure many of you know, it can get super crazy. So just to like set some constraints around that, that's where I'll start. Also, typography is something you need to think about. And accessibility is a huge consideration that we need to take into account. Users have different levels of, sightedness. Some have visual impairment, have a harder time seeing. Some users are, hearing impaired. Some use like a screen reader, if they have some heavier visual impairment. So we have to make sure that everything, works well for everyone. So we'll typically settle on a font that we use, and we want to use something that's accessible, that everyone has installed in their browser, that can be used everywhere. It's something that's practical. So we typically use just system fonts. So if you're on a Mac, you get the SF Pro fonts. Microsoft, you get the pseudo fonts. Roboto is one of the Google fonts, super common. If you're an Android user, everything's in Roboto. So we want to make it something that's accessible, that's readable on different screen sizes. Let's see. And so that's something that we work with engineering too, the front end engineers that are implementing it. The navigation, which is main part of an application, that's something we put a lot of time into figuring out what the structure is, and what the different levels of navigation should look like. Basically just a lot of organization, and scalability is something we have to think about a lot. So it's like you start an application out here at this level, maybe you have a few users, a couple of different use cases, but maybe it'll grow and expand over time, ideally. So how can you accommodate for an evolving complexity of a software product? We start putting together things like button styles, super basic atomic components. inputs, button styles, check boxes, all the different things that you need to address your use cases. Sliders, drop downs, tags you'll need sometimes. So we take all these individual pieces, and if they're all, ideally they should work well together pretty harmoniously. Um, like I said, it's easier to do that, one shot if you have that luxury. That's kind of rare. Um, and so, sometimes you'll get into more complex use cases like, tables or data grids, as they're called. And then we start putting together, we take all these individual components. After we have enough of them put together, then we start putting together like wireframes of what the product would actually look like, different pages going through all the interactions. And I can show you. Here's one that I'm just now starting to put together. So one of the components that I worked on is this table here. And the reason we started looking into this is because we know our users want to look into a ton of data, a lot of dense data, and we need to find a way to display as much as we can on a screen at one time. Then you need to think about how the user is going to go through the different pages. Sometimes they'll do like an infinite scroll where it loads, the more when you scroll down more. And so we need to weigh the benefits and drawbacks of that while working with engineering at the same time to figure out what makes sense to implement within a given timeline. And in this case, the users, we know, and I kind of know from experience that they'll want to have a set of faceted filters to be able to trim down this data to get to exactly what they want to see. And it's all about giving the user relevant info. And so one way of doing that, and also if you're, along the lines of scalability, if you're thinking about a way of filtering, then you think about, is filtering needed in other parts of the application? How can we make filtering that will work and be consistent across the product or across multiple products? And so here's one potential solution. This is just illustrating to a front-end engineer, and you really have to spell things out, pretty literally to an engineer that you're working with, just so they don't, make any mistakes or go outside of the constraints. So here's just showing that a column is sortable. You could sort in descending or ascending order. In this other example, it's showing what some more advanced filtering could look like. And I got inspiration for this from, just doing research into what I felt was scalable and what worked well. And one of the products that had some pretty neat filtering was Airtable. There were a couple of others. But again, it's an example of finding something that works really well and then, building on top of that, seeing if you can improve it, as opposed to trying to just like, make something up brand new off the top of your head. So in this case, the user starts with nothing, and then they can start adding filters. And then they start seeing some drop downs where they can pick the different types of filters. And then they can pick a function like is, say, where the ID is, 40, or they can pick is not. So it gives them multiple levels of control, and it expands, as they need it to. So they don't get a huge list at once. They get everything that they need. It's fairly intuitive to learn how to use if they, don't know how, if they're a first-time user. And then also, if you've used advanced filtering in Gmail, you'll see that when you do some advanced search functions, that in the search bar at the top, there's kind of like a pattern of text. It's basically like the quick text version of the search. And then here, to kind of educate the user on how they can do things more quickly in the future, since we have a lot of power users, they can build this through, the WYSIWYG kind of filter. And then at the same time, it's building the search at the top. So instead of, if they want to come in the next time and do it more quickly, they don't have to go through this menu. They can just type in, ID 40 level info, and then that'll give them the same results as using this. And then after we put this together, the product manager approves, the engineer signs off on it, says, yes, we can build this, or no, we need to make some compromises. And then that's where we kind of figure out, what makes sense to implement and go forward with. We will test this with users, like we'll put together a prototype, like a click-through thing. There are different applications you can use for that. I use something called Axure, AXURE, that I've used for a long time, which is a pretty powerful prototyping application. There's also Envision, which I used to use a lot more, which I use less of now. Figma has prototyping functionality, so you can hook this up to say, when you click on this part, take the user to this page, or take them here, or show them this. Then we get feedback from the users, and we refine it based on the feedback. And then ideally, you end up launching a product that is validated, that works well, that engineers can build, that looks cool, is visually impressive, is cohesive, is consistent. And also a part of it is, we work with the sales teams to see what's, who are the different people we're selling to, what are their interests, because the sales organizations in these companies tend to be very, powerful departments. So they'll kind of push for things that are visually impressive, but users don't care about. And so you kind of have to like strike a balance with that. So there's just so many moving parts, but there is always something new to learn. And I've worked in various industries, like pretty much anything you can think of. I started out in working on a dynamic ad targeting platform. I worked on network security applications at Cisco. I built a Salesforce-like application at Google. I worked on building a system that all 50 states and 7 territories used to error check their Medicaid data when they're uploading that and sending it to the federal government. So I have to learn about all of these different industries, the complexities of those, the challenges they face. So that's what really drew me to these types of software applications. And I enjoy the challenge with that every day. I won't say it's an easy job, like it can be very challenging, but it's a job that also offers a lot of, freedom. Like, now I'm fully remote, so I can work from wherever. Right now I'm at my parents' place in Santa Cruz. I live in San Francisco. So that's one of the benefits. The pay is really good relatively. And there's just a ton of opportunity in tech. And so I think I'm, really fortunate to be doing what I'm doing now. And I'll stop there and give you time for questions. Yeah, I think
I'm muted. That will do it.
Yeah. All right.
I didn't want to make any noise when you were talking. It sounds. I'm going to call on students in a second, but I wanted to ask you a couple of questions first. It sounds like collaboration is the center of so much of what you do.
Oh, it's huge. Collaboration is Yeah, I would say communication is one of the biggest skills that you can work on. That's beneficial.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and I used to think that, when I would make work, that if it was good enough, that, people would just be, just waiting for me to, put that out there and they would just receive it. Oh, what a great job. That's amazing. This speaks for itself. That has never been the case. It's not the case. And it took me, honestly, a number of years to learn and appreciate the importance of being able to sell your work to people and being able to communicate the importance of it, and not sales as in like, trying to sell a piece of junk to someone. It's like explaining to people why this is important. And people are working on a
Mm-hmm.
million different things every day. So it's like you need to explain to them and sell to them why this is important, why this will benefit them, the business.
Right.
So that part is huge, super huge. And so you have to stay in touch, and it's better to over communicate with people than under. So yeah, it's a huge
Okay.
part.
Cool. So, and one question we had, I'm typing in the chat like whimsical.com, the visual workspace. You said another tool that was parallel to Whimsical that you had
Uh,
used, but we couldn't
Miro,
understand what it was. What is it called? Miro?
Miro.
Okay,
That one's pretty neat. It's
cool.
good for collaborating with like other remote people. And most tech companies now, at least a portion of every team will be in another location. So you'll
Mm-hmm.
be more and more, I would say, expected to collaborate with people, in other parts of the world, different time zones. So having those tools
Right.
is super helpful.
Okay, cool. All right, so I'm going to go to the chat now, and the first person is Kelsey. And Kelsey, I think your microphone works. So would you want to ask your first question, or your first two questions that you have in the chat?
Yeah, sure. So I was wondering if we have the time and resources to get a master's and have no previous UX experience, do you recommend getting one? And I keep reading that there are a lot of junior designers out there fighting for the same job. So what do people with no experience or very little experience do to make themselves stand out?
That is a great question. So I've started at a time when the industry was relatively um, young, or when the field was relatively young, so there wasn't as much competition, there weren't as many programs, there were no boot camps. So that gave me, more opportunity than there is now, and I'm super grateful for that. And I try to do more to give back to younger designers because of that. If you have the resources, you have the time, and it financially makes sense to you, if you can get into a program, Carnegie Mellon, University of Washington, I say go for it. And the best part about that is it teaches you a very strong process and a really good foundation. And they give you some real world projects to work on. Like I know I've worked with people who have gone to, many different grad programs. And they'll work with companies like GE and all kinds of different companies on real projects, and it builds a portfolio. So that'll give you a good foundation, and if it'll give you a good shot of starting out at one of the big companies, Facebook or Google or um, and those are great places to work. Those are great places to start. They have great benefits. They pay really well. The people that work there are super smart. Um, so yeah, that's if you want to go that route and you can do it, then I think that's a great idea. But you don't have to. If you want to go the route of um, trying to grind, kind of like I did, and I think it's even more of a grind nowadays. You'll have to work a lot harder. You won't, you won't have to take on the debt. You'll just be starting at kind of a more of a disadvantage than those that go into a master's program. Um, but I don't think that should discourage anyone. You can still do it if you work hard enough. Like I said, I've worked with so many different designers over the years, and they aren't all the most naturally talented. They just have kept at it. and then keep at it, and then keep at it, and then keep at it. And eventually you'll meet, the right people, or you'll start out working for, like originally I worked for some agencies like the Creative Group and Randstad and other staffing agencies, and they can find you work, like some temporary contract jobs. And so that can be a way of building your portfolio too. So you can go that route. But like, I would say the dream is to go get a master's and work at one of the big tech companies. Just depends on what you want to do. I enjoy working on tons of different projects for different companies and different industries. I love learning. So like kind of jumping around a bit, and being across the board doesn't like, that's been a positive to me. If you want some more stability, that route is going to be a little more tough. If that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Kelsey. And Shalika doesn't have a microphone, so I will ask the question. What are the major tools you should be familiar with in your profession? And I listed some of them as you said them in the chat, but what tools would you just tell people to go and make sure they learn?
Figma you can use for free, so try that out. And Sketch. They're both similar in a lot of ways, but pretty much any company you'll work for is going to be using one of those two. They both take, like working with reusable components, like say you make, one like master of a component, like say a button, and then you can use different instances of that across the, different files. And then if you make one change to the master, it affects all the different files. So they have different ways of addressing scalability, and they're complex in their own ways. So I would learn at least one of those, and how they work, and learn especially how they work with components and symbols. That'll give you a good foundation there. Also,
Okay. And
one more thing real quick. If you have any interest or the time in learning like some website development, or like, how to work with CSS or HTML, just being familiar with it is helpful. I wouldn't say it's required, but it's, I would put that in the big plus category.
okay. Abby, I think you have a microphone, and your first question was about the wireframes. I don't see Abby. I wonder if she had to leave. Okay. So Abby's question was, I've heard that people are moving away from doing formal wireframes for website design, specifically smaller websites of fewer than 20 pages. Would you talk about some of the pros and cons of wireframes and the process of iterating those? And how does the CEO drive the wireframe process in your current company?
That's a great question. So the CEO doesn't, at my current company, doesn't touch any of that. Ideally, at any company where you work, the CEO doesn't have anything to do with that. They delegate that to someone else. If you're at a super early stage startup, they'll, give you some feedback or some input, but they won't tell you what to change. If you're working at a place where the CEO is driving what the website looks like and is telling people what changes to make and where, that's not a great sign.
Sorry, I think she meant SEO.
I'm sorry, I said, yeah, SEO. So, Abby, I think, Abby's audio is acting up, so she might be back.
Oh, SEO, okay. I had an internship. My first internship out of college was at SEO many years ago. That is mostly driven by the companies I've worked with in the past. There will be like a director of comms, director of communications, or someone in that department, where they will work on the website content. And so they'll determine, what articles we should put out, how it's written to include like, keywords and things like that. So that would fall typically under the communications people at larger companies, especially.
So it doesn't affect the wire. Oh, go ahead, Abby. You have sound now?
Yeah, just a follow-up question to that. So with regard to the SEO, does that process feed into your user cases, and if so, how? And then with the use cases as well, I was just wondering if the design of the different states, the buttons, the fields, etc., happens first before you do the look and feel of the software. I mean, I realize you probably have corporate colors and standards and things like that, but you know, I just remember a few years ago, people were designing the overall look and feel first, especially for a newer company, and then getting into the different states. So I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Sure. So that's another really good question. So there are, a million moving parts and all of this stuff. So you need to figure out where things are at in the process. If a company's further along, they're less likely to change, like their brand color or identity. So you just have to figure out a good balance of what makes sense. Sometimes most companies, their budget for, especially medium, smaller size companies, their budget for design is much smaller than it should be. It just takes them some time to realize how important it is and the impact it has. So sometimes you'll say, based on the resources we have, we'll start with an already made like component library. The engineers can implement it. It's well supported on the technical side. And what we can do is take, a custom color palette and make some basic CSS changes to it and make it our own in that way. You can, swap out the icons for a set that you like better or something like that. If you have the luxury to do it and the resources, you could build it all from scratch, which is, some companies building their own design system can take a couple of years. So it just depends on where things are at. If it's a smaller company, there's more leeway. But it's all about, at the end of the day, what you can ship with and have ironed out in a given timeline. And also what makes the most sense as a starting point. Like maybe you don't have everything up front, but you can start with, this small part, and then you can add another part to it and you can build on top of it. So you just have to plan all that stuff out. There's no, quick answer to that question.
Thank you.
It's a great question though.
So Jay Ashir, who doesn't have a microphone, says, when designing mobile interfaces, what are some of the best practices involving layout?
Oh, yeah. So that, there's no
Big
quick
question.
Yeah, that's a big question. One thing I will say, and I'll try to point you in the right direction. There's a guy named Luke Wroblewski, WROBLEWSKI, I think. I think he's at Google now, but he was a big name for years in user experience design, and he's done a ton of research on mobile. He's almost entirely focused on mobile, or he spent most of his career on that. And he's given some really good talks, which should still be on YouTube, where he goes through a lot of data and research into answering those exact questions. What works better in this case? What works better in that case? Here's what the research shows. He's big into research and data. And so I think that would be a good starting place. But there's so much research out there on mobile use that you should be able to find some good stuff. But I wouldn't say there's one best practice. I mean, also you could look into Google's and Apple's guidelines. They publish all of those online, and they've put a lot of good research out there into that. And that's something that evolves too. Depends on who the demographic is. I mean, just think about all the different apps that you use. What is hot right now, like TikTok, super huge now. Maybe the fact that I'm talking about it might mean it's dead now. So, you never know. and things change a lot, things go in and out of style, but the most important thing is making sure it's, it's easy to use. Like iOS, their thing is being more usable. My parents find it much more usable than Android. So it just depends on a lot of different factors. But it's all based on research. So if you want to dig into that, there's a ton out there.
So Mabel had this question: when people hire for UX designers, do they prefer designers who have worked in specific fields, or is it a matter of just showing you can design for any product? You mentioned that you have worked in all kinds of industries.
If somebody has experience in the industry, that's a huge plus, especially in like the super technical stuff that I work in. And lately I've been working in more of like developer tools, things that software engineers and infrastructure engineers use. So if somebody has that knowledge ahead of time, that's super helpful, because the amount of time it takes to onboard someone to learn that, it takes a long time. But there are also a lot of people that I work with now who did not come from that background. So showing the ability to learn, ability, willingness, desire to learn new technologies, to learn new industries is huge. But I would say more than anything, it comes down to your process of what steps you take to go through to solve problems more than anything.
Cool. Other questions? I think I caught everything in the chat, but if I didn't, please unmute yourself and feel free to ask it at this time. So maybe I'll ask the closing one. So if you were beginning, sorry.
I was going to say, is there anything you had to learn that you didn't think you would have had to learn before you started?
Oh, all kinds of stuff. When I started, I looked at it mostly as kind of like how we looked at building smaller websites. A lot of it was based around the visuals and the structure and the layout of things. But at a certain point, you kind of get, after you build, designed enough things and worked on enough websites or software applications, you kind of like just get how the structure works and things that work well. And those aren't the big challenges. The real challenges day to day are figuring out how you can be most effective, where you can add value. So my focus has shifted a lot more from the visual artistic side to more of like the business side, and more of the looking at it as solving problem side. So I don't get like upset anymore when it's like, I don't get to design, put things together in Figma or Sketch or Illustrator all day, every day. I've learned to move to where the value is in doing what I do. And I kind of mentioned it earlier, but writing skills are huge. Being able to write effectively is so important, so incredibly important. And it's something that I, didn't appreciate for a while. There's a book called How to Write an Email by a guy named Justin Kerr, Kerr. It's awesome, that I would recommend. He also wrote a book called How to Be Great at Your Job. They're all like very, concise, to the point, easy and fun to read books that are super helpful and that kind of stuff. So writing, communication, just learning to have, a positive presence, learning how to value other people's time, and make sure you, get to the point and be as concise as possible in meetings. Skills like that are super helpful. So your portfolio will get you, through the door, and it's something you have to have. These are just like foundational skills. But to be successful, to advance, requires, all the communication stuff, and, making sure you're on top of things and being able to anticipate other people's needs, things like that.
I do have one more question, if that's okay.
Of course.
In terms of like web accessibility, who's kind of in charge of that? Because I know some of it is in the HTML itself and some of it is color contrast or icon size. How do you collaborate to achieve good accessibility?
So that's something that I'm working on in this kind of side project that I'm working on, the nonprofit. It's something that none of them have had thought about. And then once people realize what the issue is, it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I don't know how we didn't think about it, but it starts out with the designer. You know, we have to make sure that we have the contrast ratios right. And one of the cool things about Figma is that they have some plugins that'll help you check that. That'll go through your text and the background that it's on to make sure that the contrast ratio is right. So we can build and to make sure that, you know, we account for different types of color blindness. So we have to stay on top of that. But engineers also need to or can build some things into their code to make sure, you know, just to double check that it's accessible. The engineers also need to make sure that they're the ones that test whether or not a screen reader can read things appropriately in the right order and in the right way, and make sure things have the right tags. So it's really a team. It's a team effort. But right now, like we have our website team, our marketing team, our product design team, the engineering team, we all have accessibility related docs put together outlining, you know, all of our efforts around that. So it's a super important thing. If you're working at government projects, there's, you know, 508 compliance. There are different types of requirements for that depending on what type of project you're working on. But right now our engineers are writing tests to test for accessibility, just to make sure that anything they build is, you know, it can be flagged in real time if they put, you know, if they write code that isn't accessible. So yeah, it's a team effort, but typically it starts with either the front end engineers or designers.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Kelsey. That's a really important question. I think everyone's responsible for accessibility, and it's that awareness is really taking time to permeate all the different ways that we make things. We deal with that in education, as you know, Zach, the parallel kind of problems where you have to design from the start with accessibility in mind.
Exactly.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, and accessibility and you know, inclusion as well. So, you know, inclusive design is something that people are thinking about more as well, just to make sure, you know, you're representative of everyone and everything you do, to make sure that what you're designing, you know, meets the needs of everyone, is accessible by everyone, that you're presenting and, you know, representing, you know, the world as it is today and not how, you know, it was marketed as 40, 50 years ago. So those are important things.
Incredible. Thank you so much, Zach. Any last comments you want to make, or any recommendations for people, the people here who are working on their portfolio and planning their next steps into parallel careers to you?
So there is, I just thought of the website, Best Folios. Best Folios. So it's just a collection of a ton of different portfolios that'll give you some good ideas as far as, you know, what works well. And I would try just like, if you're having a hard time or, you know, whatever, just copying what they do is a good way of starting to absorb, you know, the information, why things work the way they do, you know, what works well. If you can copy something that someone else does, that'll help give you an understanding. Don't feel like you need to make everything totally creative and original. You know, that part isn't super important or something that, you know, companies value a ton. And when you look at other designers to hire people, that's not something you're gonna, you know, value a ton either. It's, you know, putting yourself in the shoes of those people, you know, what would they find important? And also it's, if you keep at it and, you know, don't get discouraged. Like it's especially hard times right now. We had a ton of roles open, and we've had to we're freezing hiring for at least the rest of the quarter. And I know most companies are too right now. But use this time to, work on your portfolio, to update your skills. You might have to start out, probably start out on smaller projects, and just grind away, work your way up, and find a way of working that works well for you. Set work hours. You're going to work from 9 or 10 a.m. to 5 at, working on your portfolio or whatever the hours are, and then stick to that. And then when you're not doing that, try to take some time off and recharge. Also, if it makes sense for you to do the graduate school route, that's a great option too. But just keep at it. I'm not particularly smart. I'm not a super talented artist or designer. I just worked really hard, and I was always eager to learn, and willing to listen to other people's, feedback as far as, you're not doing this right, or this doesn't make sense. And then just thinking, how can I do this better? And it's a good career, and like I said, it offers a lot of freedom, but it's a lot of work. So if you enjoy it, awesome. If you can tolerate it and like the benefits, awesome too. There's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, if I can do it, you can do it. So.
Thank you so much, Zach. I really appreciate you sharing your perspectives and your work, and we just thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you. My pleasure. And if anyone has any other questions, you want to send to Kate, I'm more than happy to answer those or point you in the right direction, give you a more extensive list of resources. So I'd be to help any way I can.
Yeah, there's a lot of links in the chat, and all of you should be able to download the chat, but I'll also take the chat and add it to our speaker page under Zach, so you'll be able to access those things. And everyone says thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.